Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the Fantasy Reaction. Just got done watching the Cowboys and the Los Angeles Chargers. Mr. Velez, bit of a flu game today, feeling a bit under the weather. But hey, start of the week, Dak Prescott came up big, QB2 on the week, looking like his old self. How you feeling?
I'm feeling all right. Definitely not feeling the best. My throat is fried right now. But we got a show to do. We're going to talk about Mr. Dackery Prescott. We're going to talk about those Dallas Cowboys. But it was like a great bad game. And I say bad game where we saw some just sloppy football on both sides of the ball from both teams. Uh, but I'm excited to sit down and chop it up.
Yeah, this was a 20-17 final, but if you had Dak Prescott, you're happy. If you have CeeDee Lamb, you're happy. If you have Keenan Allen, you're happy. Even if you have Tony Pollard, you're probably pretty happy at the end of the day. The only real, I think, dud was probably Austin Eckler, first game back from injury. But let's talk about the Cowboys first, because Dak Prescott coming off that embarrassing loss against the 49ers where everything was falling from the sky. Everything was looming gloom for Dallas. You got Jerry Jones going on talk radio, and he bounced back 270 yards, a touchdown passing, plus a touchdown rushing, 40 rushing yards. This was the most mobile we've seen Dak Prescott all year. I mentioned Tony Pollard, who couldn't get much going on the ground, only 30 rushing yards, but through the air, 6 receptions for 80 yards. I thought that one breakaway run, he was going to be able to take it to the crib, but Asante Samuel made a nice tackle
Talked
at the
his
end there to
ass.
save it. CeeDee Lamb 7 for 117. Brandon Cooks had a decent game, 4 for 36. Gallup, Jake Ferguson rounds out what happened on Dallas' side. But overall, if you're a Cowboys fan, you got to be over the moon, because this is a Chargers team that is going to be in the mix for the playoffs. You're coming off that terrible loss, and you really just wanted to see your offense be able to move the ball and not look completely lackluster like it has multiple weeks this season, right? It's not just that 49ers game. Even against Arizona, right? When they ended up losing that game, they stole that multiple times in the red zone. And while they weren't perfect in the red zone by any means this game, they were able to get in a couple of times there. You saw Dak Prescott, that little read option, little creativity from Mike McCarthy. So did anything stick out from you outside of Dak bouncing back?
So I titled this video Fantasy versus Reality because obviously we're called the Fantasy Reaction. But the reality of this game was that both these quarterbacks did not play their best of football. Definitely made more plays than Herbert did, especially down the stretch. But there were still moments where I desired a little bit more from Dak. We did see Gallup drop a couple of passes. I'm going to give Dak the benefit of the doubt. I think Dak played a really strong game, but that missed touchdown opportunity to Tony Pollard, that of course you get the touchdown lead, you're feeling a lot more comfortable allowing the defense to go out there, and they played a very solid game overall regardless, talking about Dallas. But that's just one that I'm looking for. That's an easy pass that you're hitting to Tony, who has a step or two over his defender. It's one of those that you need to hit just to get some confidence going. Dak, you already had a great game. Put the icing on the cake there. But for Justin Herbert, again, that's the epitome of fantasy versus reality, because the reality of it was this was Herbert's worst performance that I've seen so far this season. And it's funny because in fantasy football, he still had a strong finish. What do you have? Almost 19 fantasy points.
QB5 on the
So,
week.
it's one of those that it was good enough for him to be a top 10 quarterback in fantasy football, but it was not good enough to win you this ball game. And there were moments where, again, you were wanting more from Herbert. Not one, but two missed opportunities to Keenan Allen. Keenan Allen just wide open in space, just begging to be hit in stride. Both of them overthrow. That's not the Herbert that we've been accustomed to, not just for this season, but of course throughout the entirety of his career. He just looked sloppy. He just looked a touch off. And so, again, fantasy versus reality, because in reality, neither of these two quarterbacks were out of this world. Definitely Dak, I lean towards having a way better performance than Herbert, but Herbert, where reality is, he didn't have that great of a game, but fantasy tells you, you go out and you feel great about your guy giving you almost 20 fantasy points.
And it felt like both of these quarterbacks were under a ton of pressure. Dak ended up getting sacked 5 times, but it felt like every play offensively, at least drop back, was Dak has to scramble out of the pocket. Dak has to make someone miss in the backfield because it felt like almost every single snap the Chargers were in the backfield. And Justin Herbert, to an extent, too, not as much, but he ended up running the ball 6 times, right? So he only got sacked once. He's a little bit more mobile, definitely more mobile than Dak is at this point of his career. And I was rooting for the Chargers to win this game. Of course, me and Joel were going, back and forth in terms of who's going to have the best record. So I was going for the Chargers, but what I'm not liking, what I'm seeing on my timeline is this nasty Justin Herbert discourse I got. Shout out to the Mallory Bros, of course, good friends of the show. But kind of my mention saying that if this was Kirk Cousins, we'd be saying Kirk Cousins is showing up on prime time. Listen, Justin Herbert, did he have a terrible loss in the playoffs last year? Absolutely. Should he have won this game? Probably should have. But Justin Herbert is a top 5 quarterback in the NFL. There's very few quarterbacks that you're going to be taking over him. His skill set, his arm, his mobility, his leadership. He is one of the best quarterbacks in the NFL. And if you want to take this one game or 1 or 2 games throughout his career and say, I can't trust him to be my franchise quarterback, I can't convince you otherwise. He doesn't have that big win. He hasn't won his division. He hasn't won a playoff game. But I also know when I watch Justin Herbert, there is maybe 2 or 3 other guys on this planet that can do what he do with the ball in his hands. He is that special. So it was a tough L for the Chargers. They feel like almost the Cowboys of the AFC, where they should be better. And every year they kind of get this hype and they have that quarterback, that well-known quarterback. They have the skill position players, but they always come up short. Now, to Dallas's credit, they usually get into the playoffs every year. The Chargers, not as much, but they always feel like they're just one step short, one player missing, one side of the ball that's off. And this kind of came up again today where, for the most part, their offense has showed up every week and their defense has been the one kind of lagging behind. This time, the defense showed up. You allowed 20 points to the Cowboys offense, who, if you look at the totality of numbers, I think it's a bit nicer to them than what they've actually been this season, but it's still a more than formidable group. If you're going into the game saying, we're limiting Dallas to 20 points, I would like your odds as the Chargers. But just another game where they had the graphic after the game. The last 2 seasons, they have the second most losses by 3 or less or 1 possession. It was funny because it was the Broncos, Chargers, and Raiders all in the same division, all top 3. And of course, the Chargers have a lot less losses than those other 2 teams. So when they get in these close games, these 1 possession, 3 points, they always seem to end up on the short side of the stick. Part of that is on Justin Herbert. Sure, Miami game, he could have came back and won. This game, he could have came back and won. But I also not the biggest fan of their head coach, not the biggest fan of Brandon Staley. But to talk about their fantasy output real quick, as we mentioned, Justin Herbert ends up as a top 5-6 quarterback on the week. You're very happy with that. Austin Eckler, first game back from injury. You're probably hoping for a bit more, 27 yards rushing, 35 on the ground with 4 receptions. But we know how great Austin Eckler is, right? He's someone that's going to be in your lineup every single week. He missed almost a month, though. I was expecting a little bit more than this, so a bit disappointing. Keenan was great. Josh Palmer looked fantastic. He was questionable coming into this game, but he looked 100%. Fantastic, got 7 targets. But I think the only big takeaway I have on the Charger side of the ball, Quentin Johnson. Quentin Johnson, 2 targets, 0 receptions, 0 yards. This is someone, when he got drafted there, everyone in fantasy football, their eyes lit up. Because everyone's kind of tired of Mike Williams at this point. Everyone was kind of tired of Keenan Allen, even coming into the season, where we know how great Keenan is, but let's get someone exciting and explosive into this offense. And Quentin Johnson, he has the opportunity now with Mike Williams down. We've seen Josh Palmer play more than him. I mean, you got Donald Parham getting more targets than him, Gerald Everett getting more targets than him. In redraft, he's 100% droppable. And in Dynasty at this point, I mean, his value has taken a big hit. We're talking he's probably worth a 2024 second at this point. So disappointing to see, but do you have any other takeaways from LA's offense?
I'll say I believe Austin Eckler will be okay. Definitely am with you. This was a matchup where Dallas's rush defense has been relatively vulnerable. And so with him being out for multiple weeks, having that extra week to rest with the bye week that they just had, you anticipated him to be more effective in this game, but that's a credit to the Dallas Cowboys defense. They absolutely did a great job. Keenan Allen continues to be one of the best players in fantasy football. 85 yards, the volume that he's seeing, the target share that he's seeing, double-digit targets once again, getting into the end zone very early on. Keenan's going to be Keenan. That's definitely one of the best plays all season long. But just to piggyback, man, it's just so much more obvious that Josh Palmer is a better wide receiver than Quinn Johnston. It's just your eyes immediately gravitate towards what they're seeing. Josh Palmer has made some nice catches, even some balls that are behind him. He's still making an acrobatic type play to bring them in. We saw it a little bit earlier in the season where a ball got tipped and Josh Palmer's focus is just so locked in. He's still able to catch the ball, bail out Justin Herbert, and score that touchdown. I mean, Josh Palmer is very easily better than Quinn Johnston at this point in both of their careers. And maybe it's because he's a rookie, and maybe because I'm partial to a guy like a Jameson Williams, who I just don't think has seen that opportunity enough to completely count him out. It's his rookie season, still got his ways to go in terms of getting a guy like Herbert to take away targets from Keenan Allen, take away targets from an Austin Eckler, from a Josh Palmer. We saw Gerald Everett get involved into this game a bunch. You mentioned Don Parham. He's been one of Herbert's, let me not call him go-to guy, but definitely he relies on him. Quinn Johnston, with the draft pick that he was taken at, he should be over at least a Donald Parham at this point. But it's a slow burn, and it's just a matter of getting acquainted with this offense. It is also a first-year offensive coordinator with the Los Angeles Chargers, of course, with Kellen Moore. That's a narrative of this game, and maybe the offense didn't look great in terms of the offensive line. There's a ton of penalties as well, but strictly talking about fantasy football, I believe that this Chargers offense will be okay. We understand that the Cowboys were horrendous last week against the Niners, and maybe that's why we were anticipating that the Chargers would come out here and absolutely light it up, because that's what they have been doing. But we have to give respect where respect is due to, of course, the Dallas Cowboys defense. They had a game plan, and they executed very high. So I'm not going to take too much of this into my long-term evaluation of the Los Angeles Chargers. I think everyone's going to be okay.
Shout out to our guy P in the chat. I see them on Through the Wire. They're locked in on fantasy. At least P is. I don't know about the rest of the guys. I hear him talking about trades, and I think D Mills got finessed in some trade. I was listening to one of their episodes like a week or two ago. And
I was gonna say, I know D Mills was struggling. He was like 0 something. I don't know.
Yeah, and I just heard it, and P might have got like Kelsey or something. It was like 2 or 3 pieces I heard P get. And I was like, damn. And I heard what D Mills got. I was like, damn, that's terrible for him.
P's been locked into the fantasy reaction. That's why he's turning up in his league.
He knows.
Shout out to the guy.
Yeah, that's about it we got from the recap here. So we get into the studs and duds. Let's start at the quarterback position. And listen, Drew, it couldn't have been a better week because QB1, your boy Tua. QB2, your star of the week, Dak Prescott. There's not much to say about Tua at this point. The ceiling is QB1, and the floor feels like it's probably not going to drop below QB 12 to 15, right? He has a very safe floor, an insane ceiling, and his touchdown rate and the amount of big plays this Miami offense can generate. He's the reason. He is a big reason why coming into this year, he was someone that I was higher on, especially for fantasy. The rest to round out the top 10, you had Jared Goff, Sam Howell, Herbert, Hurts, Ritter entering this top 10 discussion once again, Mahomes and Trevor Lawrence. I think the only name that really sticks out here is in the fantasy versus reality situation is Jalen Hurts, who has just a terrible game, 3 interceptions, and overall it was just probably his worst game these last 2 seasons, probably his worst game since acquiring A.J. Brown. And for fantasy football, he still ends up being QB7 on the week because he has 2 touchdowns, 280 passing yards, and 47 rushing yards. So we see even in Jalen Hurts' worst game, for fantasy football, he's still going to be one of your best options. He's still going to have one of the safest floors. And the ceiling is so high because although we didn't see the tush push in this game, anytime they get down to that 1-2 yard line, he's almost a lock to get 6 points for that rushing touchdown. Lamar Jackson ended up having a decent game around QB 11 on the week. Josh Allen here too. Any names you want to hit on before we move over to running backs? There wasn't any that really stuck out to me as surprising.
Sam Howell continues to be fantasy relevant. This is a top 11 quarterback at this point. He just was a top 7 guy in fantasy football this past week. Sam Howell is one of those guys where in reality, you look at him and he's definitely not a bad quarterback. I definitely don't completely dislike what I'm seeing, but the fantasy output has just been there for him. He goes and gets into the end zone or scores 3 touchdowns on very, very efficient 151 yards, just able to execute a game plan and get a job done. Again, quarterback 11 in 2 quarterback leagues. If this is your quarterback 2, you have a lot worse options, especially at that quarterback position. And I understand how difficult a 2 QB league can be. I have Dak Prescott, and this week I'm thrilled, but all season long I'm thinking that I have a lock at quarterback 2 with Dak, and a guy like Sam Howell, who obviously in real life does not compare to a Dak Prescott. He's going out here and he's being a top 11 quarterback. And some weeks he's shown that he could be a top 5 quarterback as well. So I want to give him some love. And Desmond Ridder, again, somehow, some way cracks into the top 10. That's pretty funny, especially because in reality, that dude had a bad game, especially down the stretch. But in fantasy football, top 10 finish is a top 10 finish.
He did. Moving on to QB duds. I have 3 ones that I want to go over. Justin Fields is on this list too, but with the injury, he wasn't playing well. To be fair, he was not playing well before the injury. Now it sounds like it's going to be more of a grip issue, maybe some sort of pain tolerance with the sprained thumb. There's a chance we've seen Justin Fields, his chance to be the franchise quarterback, go down the drain with this injury because Bagnet, is that who you pronounce this backup's name? He did not look ready. He did not look ready for prime time. He does not look like somebody that should be starting NFL football games. So I do fear the Chicago Bears will lose multiple games, probably all of their games, if Justin Fields doesn't play. But the other names I want to mention is Brock Purdy has his second real stinker of the year, QB 25 on the week, 125 yards, completes less than 50% of his passes, a touchdown, interception. On the road against a top 3 defense probably isn't the spot for Purdy. I know you mentioned it off air that you were thinking about him being your sit of the week. I also thought about him being my sit of the week, but up till that point, especially coming after that Dallas game, you just felt so confident in the offense as a whole that Purdy might not have a great game, but can he get 220 yards and 2 touchdowns and be a top 15 quarterback? Probably. That didn't happen in this game. More so than anything, though, I think it's Cleveland's defense. Even if Debo is out, even if CMC is out, they're not going to be playing this good of a defense. So I still trust Purdy as my QB2 in 2 quarterback leagues. And the other 2 I want to mention are Kirk Cousins and Joe Burrow. Cousins was my star of the week. I thought without Justin Jefferson against Chicago, he'd be able to really have at least a safe floor game. Maybe not that top 5 ceiling we've seen multiple times this year, but at least be a top 12 to 15 quarterback. He was quarterback 24. And if he's not able to do that against the Chicago Bears, failed to put up 200 yards, the offense as a whole put up 20 points, Kirk Cousins is probably unstartable in 1 quarterback leagues. In 2 QB leagues, you probably have to feel comfortable starting him because the options aren't out there. And then Joe Burrow, I just want to mention because last week he looked so fantastic, 300 yards, 3 touchdowns. He was moving. And although he was moving in this game still, he didn't look injured. The offense felt like it was back to the injured Joe Burrow offense where everything was short. Everything was getting out of his hands quick. There wasn't as many deep shots. He goes for 185 yards, 2 touchdowns, and an interception. Overall, I didn't think he played that well, just watching him in real life fantasy aside. But after putting up 30 against Arizona, I'm thinking Joe Burrow is back. So out of these 3 guys, Purdy, Cousins, Burrow, do you feel any differently than what I mentioned?
I'll tell you, hearing you say Kirk Cousins is unstartable, at first it takes you by surprise because, of course, we've seen Kirk Cousins be so great. But then you realize that if he's not going to thrive in this matchup against Chicago, where is a matchup that you can feel confident in him in 1 quarterback leagues where TJ Hawkinson was supposed to have a huge game, was kind of underwhelming. Jordan Addison was able to get into the end zone, but outside of that, really underwhelming as well. This offense as a whole just really was not anything exciting. But I can't disagree with you too much there. Without Jettas, this offense does lack explosiveness, and why we're so high on Jordan Addison coming to the season and so far in this season was that he was alongside Jettas, and Jettas was going to draw a majority of the attention and it was going to allow Jordan to get his. So it was a great sign to see Jordan get in the end zone. But for Kirk Cousins, 181 yards, a touchdown, a lost fumble, that's not going to cut it. That is quarterback 2 numbers. In 2 quarterback leagues, if you have Kirk Cousins, I'm sure you're not the happiest right now, but there are worse options, but just not a great performance from Kirk. Brock, it's one of those games that you just put in the back seat. Don't think about it again. I think that we respect and acknowledge the Cleveland Browns defense and how elite it has been so far in this season. It isn't something to keep your eye on, whether CMC is going to be out there. Of course, Debo Samuel also got injured in this game. So it's going to be very interesting to see how this offense looks potentially without these two guys. But there is still an Ayuk. There still is a George Kittle and Jordan Mason, who we may be talking about a little bit later in the show. He is not a bad running back. And honestly, all we've seen so far in Shanahan's tenure as San Fran's head coach is that someone can come in and do a job. So I think Purdy is going to be okay. It's just one of those situations where Cleveland Browns are going to be the Cleveland Browns, and that defense is legit.
Moving on to running backs here, we have the Dolphins with the QB1 of the week and also the RB1 on the week. This was written in the stars once you saw Achane go out. Raheem Mostert only being, with Jeff Wilson out, Raheem Mostert being the workhorse running back. 17 attempts, 115 yards, 2 touchdowns, also had a receiving touchdown. He put up 33 fantasy points, by far and away the RB1 on the week. Travis Etienne, back-to-back weeks. RB1 week 6 against Indy, RB2 week 5 against Buffalo, and RB2 this week against Indy. He was fantastic. 18 attempts, 55 yards, and 2 touchdowns. Another 30 yards receiving, 3 receptions. Etienne was someone I was not high on coming into this season. I never really fully trusted him to be a workhorse back. And then once they drafted Tank Bigsby, I'm thinking that's the last straw I needed to basically have Etienne off my draft board. But through 6 weeks this year, he's RB3 on the season. He has finishes of RB8, RB9, RB1, RB2. He's getting, 15 plus touches in every week except one. That's 15 carries, And in all these other games, he's getting 5 receptions, 4 receptions, 3 receptions, 4 receptions. He is getting the workload as a workhorse running back. He's on an offense that is going to be scoring points. And you got to look at Travis Etienne as, at minimum, a top 10 running back going forward.
Travis Etienne has been amazing. There's no other way to describe it. He has been nothing short of amazing. The breakaway ability, the big play ability, he has obviously shown that so far in this season. So you have to have the utmost faith that he can continue that. And to talk about Raheem Mostert, I actually posed the question to you. Is this sustainable? Nobody in their right mind had a guy like Raheem Mostert being the number 2 running back in fantasy football. And nobody also, another guy that I want to talk about, had a guy like Kyren Williams in their top 5 coming to the year. It just shows you how unpredictable fantasy football can be. But is this sustainable? Now, Kyren, we understand is going to be out next week, did have the ankle injury. But Mostert, with Devon out for at least another 3 weeks, is this sustainable for a guy like Raheem, who has just been nothing short of outstanding in only one game this year against the Buffalo Bills where he did not have double-digit fantasy points? Do you believe that Mostert can continue to be this top 5 running back in fantasy football?
If he's healthy, absolutely. That's my only concern with Mostert. He's gotten banged up a lot when he was on the Niners, even when he's been on the Dolphins last season or maybe 2 years now. My biggest concern is health. If he's healthy and out on the field, McDaniel has shown he wants to have a workhorse. Raheem Mostert can take on 17 to 20 touches a game. He's explosive. And in this offense that everyone and their mom is terrified of Tyreek Hill beating them over the top, and all of this motion that's going on, all these guys going every different direction, and you have Raheem Mostert as one of the fastest explosive running backs in the league. As long as he's healthy, every single week in this offense has to be looked at as a top 5 running back.
And the last question I want to ask you is Zach Moss automatic start every single week? Now, I'll preface it with this. He did have a top 10 finish again this week. However, the usage was drastically different.
Yes.
Last week, we saw him at 80%. This week, he was at a dead flat 50%, but still was able to crack the top 10, was mostly due to the fact that he was in the end zone. And he saw, six catches, 7 targets,
38 yards.
So, I mean, is this one of those guys where we see the running back position continue to get thinner and thinner, that Zach Moss is just, we're blindly putting him in as our RB2 this season?
It's tough because you have Zach Moss's snaps decreasing. You have Jonathan Taylor going from around 15% snaps to around 45% snaps. So it matches what the Colts are saying. The Colts said coming into this week, Jonathan Taylor, his workload's going to get ramped up. And, it's, of course, going to take a hit to the other running back there being Zach Moss. It's a situation that I'm in. In our main league, I have Zach Moss.
That's why I asked you.
I sat him when he dropped 40 2 weeks ago. I started him this past week where he's still a top 10 running back. But you look at the workload he got in this game, 7 carries for 21 yards, gone to the end zone, 6 receptions for 38 yards. It's really a matter of how long will it take for Jonathan Taylor to have full constraint over this backfield.
Mm-hmm.
Is Jonathan Taylor going to be getting 70 to 80% of the touches in 2 weeks or in 5 weeks? Because at some point you have to pay your 10 to 12 million dollar running back. You have to give him the carries that he deserves, because you didn't pay him that money just to have a 60-40 split in the backfield. Now, is there a chance that Zach Moss keeps playing like this and he just makes the most out of his opportunities and basically forces the coach's hand to say, you can't take me off the field, I need to have some sort of role? I think there's a chance, because Zach Moss has looked sensational this year, but his role is still going to be decreased to the point where he's most likely going to be a flex play than an RB2. I don't have his matchup this upcoming week. I could pull it up real quick.
I gotcha.
He plays
Cleveland and New Orleans back to back.
Yeah, no thank you. So this makes it easy. You don't want anything to do with Cleveland. You want nothing to do with New Orleans. If he goes crazy
back with Carolina and New England, though, that's kind of huge.
But we have these next 2 weeks to see what is this workload going to look like? What are the splits going to look like? Because 3 weeks from now, we're going to know a lot more about what does Jonathan Taylor and Zach Moss splits look like. Going into next week, not as sure. The only other name I want to shout out here is Ramondre Stevenson, because we shit on him a bunch this season. Was he my set of the week? No, I think he was my set of the week 2 weeks ago. But he bounced back, 10 attempts, 46 yards, and a touchdown, added 5 receptions for 24 yards. Are we back with Ramondre, or just little lucky with the touchdown?
Looked visually pleasing on the football field this past weekend. He actually looked like the Ramondre that we know and love coming into this season. He hasn't been that guy early on, at least weeks 1 through 5. And so for him to just pass the eye test with me, that was a great sign, because this was a matchup he definitely should have thrived in. And being a top 10 finish this week, that's everything that you at least you should have expected with how great this matchup was. But understanding how volatile the Patriots offense has been this season, they've been one of the worst offensive units in football. There's nothing that you can really rely on. But where we saw him really get his work and a lot of his fantasy output was outside of the touchdown, him getting that passing work that we know that he is capable of getting. 6 targets, 5 catches. This is why we loved Ramondre Stevenson so much, because of how much of a workhorse he was in the passing game. So for it not to be the case so far in this season, outside of week 1, and of course this past week, it's been upsetting. But again, he passed the eye test. It is a great sign going forward, as someone who, of course, believes in the talent that is Ramondre, but speaks to those that are Ramondre Stevenson owners.
So moving on to the RB duds, I have just 4 on this list, or 3 actually. The first one was your set of the week, Rachaad White, 7 carries for 26 yards, 3 receptions for 12 yards, RB 27 on the year. He's finished as RB 38, RB 9, 39, 20, and 37. At this point, we know what Rachaad White is, right? He's a flex play, and fantasy football, you need running backs to just put in that running back slot so you can't drop him. But every week you start Rachaad White, you're hoping for a touchdown to get him to that top 15. If he doesn't, he'll probably be a middle-of-the-pack RB3. Dameon Pierce, who was my sit of the week this week going up against the Saints, 13 carries for 34 yards, 0 targets, 0 receptions, RB46 on the week. Pierce had back-to-back games of RB16 finishes in week 3 and week 4, and we kind of thought the tide might have been turning. He was getting 18 to 20 attempts. But outside of those 2 weeks, he's been RB 39, 45, 25, and 46. He's just not an explosive runner, and he's not scoring touchdowns right now. So if he's not going to be able to rip off big plays, and when they get into the red zone, he does get some opportunity. He still is, their workhorse back, but he's not doing enough to be consistent. And if he's going to be RB 25 or worse 4 out of his 6 weeks, very similar to Rachaad White, that you have to roster him, and in a pinch, you could probably start and hope for a touchdown, but you're not excited. And the last guy I want to mention is just James Cook, who was my start of the week on the other hand. 14 carries for 71 yards. Very strangely, 0 in the receiving game. No targets, no receptions. It was a weird game by Buffalo, and oddly enough, he only played 49% of snaps. And that was with Damon Harris, getting injured at some point in this game too, second, third quarter, I believe. So I don't really know what to take away from James Cook from this game. I'm kind of just throwing this away because the whole Bills offense and the Bills in totality, offense, defense, head coaching, everything was just terrible against this Giants game. But is there anything deeper you're looking at with any of these players?
So to talk about James Cook, he looked efficient. He looked effective. Of course, not the fantasy output that you were expecting against a Giants run defense that has been very poor so far this season. However, I want to give credit to that Giants defense who has been solid the last 3 weeks against pretty solid competition also. But to talk about Rachaad White, where I know Rachaad White has not been the best by any means, that performance is more so one that I want to talk about, the Detroit Lions rush defense, because right now they're giving an average of 10.9 fantasy points to running backs. That is almost just on the cusp of single-digit points to fantasy running backs, where the average is near 20 fantasy points. It speaks volumes to how great this Detroit Lions rush unit has been on terms of stopping the run, where the only guy that is skewing these numbers was Ken Walker, who has been a top 10 guy so far this season. He's been amazing in his own right. And that's where he was inefficient, but was able to salvage his fantasy output with 2 touchdowns. So I want that to be something that you take into account when you're setting your lineups. When you see a matchup versus Detroit, take it with a grain of salt. Don't expect the world. Hope for the best, because this unit is legit and for real.
Yeah, we get so used to seeing certain teams just assuming they're terrible, and on both sides, assuming they're terrible or assuming they're amazing. Like this year, every time you see Philly, you're like, oh shit, like going against the Eagles, you're like, damn. But then you're like, no, the Eagles have been beatable. And same thing with Detroit on the other hand, where they've been so beatable on the ground and the air, honestly, through, I mean, it feels like forever throughout our lives, and
Sure.
now they're able to lock up. All right, let's move over to wide receiver studs. Wide receiver 1 on the week. The Dolphins almost got the trifecta of QB, RB, and wide receiver 1, but that boy in Detroit, Amon-Ra St. Brown, 30 fantasy points. He goes 12 for 124 and a touchdown. Sun God, one of your favorite players. Shout out to Craig Reynolds, who had an amazing block where Amon-Ra, it was almost a Tyreek-esque play where he's coming over the middle of the field, just trying to find some room. Craig Reynolds lays an insane block. It's like 3 guys out of the way. He's able to turn the corner and score a touchdown. But Tyreek, wide receiver 2, and your star of the week, Adam Thielen, time and time again. The only bad news is he's on a bye next week, so you can't play him. But outside that, I looked earlier today, and in our league, which has bonuses and stuff, he's wide receiver 3 on the season. So I don't know, in your league, maybe a little bit different. Wide receiver 4 in our league, excuse me. But at a minimum, he's a top 10 wide receiver, and he's someone that was probably going in round like 14, 15 of drafts. In our draft, he was round 12, but someone who was completely overlooked. I thought he was completely washed, and he's out here balling this season.
I'm absolutely thrilled to hear you giving some love to Adam Thielen, because again, the theme of this show is fantasy versus reality. Now, reality, we felt as if coming to this year that Adam Thielen didn't have that same explosiveness, that same skill that he's shown us in previous years. He's getting up there in age, but being the number 1 option, being an experienced veteran that he is, Bryce Young needs that. And he has taken full advantage where the last 2 weeks, he has seen 13 targets. He has brought in 11 balls in both those respective weeks. He's had over 100 yards receiving. He's gotten into the end zone in both weekends in a row. Adam Thielen's going to continue to do this because Bryce Young needs that reliable option. And slowly but surely, we're starting to see Bryce Young get a little bit more comfortable week by week. We saw him in garbage time versus Detroit look solid. And, of course, versus Miami, where this game got out of hand really quick. He started out the game off very effective. Of course, that wind down as the game went on because Miami's going to Miami. But Adam Thielen is a must start every week outside of week 7 because, of course, he has his bye week. But even against Houston, I don't care. Put him in your lineup. Indy, Chicago. Dallas is one of those that you probably look at and think, I don't know. He's going to get his looks. He's going to get his targets. He will most definitely be fantasy relevant. I have no doubt about it.
To go through a few other names here, we have Cooper Kupp, who has not lost a step, 7 for 148 and a touchdown on 9 targets. Drake London, wide receiver 5 on the week. 4 of the last 5 weeks, he's getting double-digit fantasy points. We're talking about wide receiver 21, wide receiver 60 was going against Detroit, but then wide receiver 31, wide receiver 21, and wide receiver 5 this past week. 9 for 125, 12 targets. I mean, after week 1, it looked terrible. It looked like this offense is doing nothing. And while this offense definitely has its ebbs and flows, Drake London and Kyle Pitts got in the end zone as well. You have to be thrilled if you own either of these guys in fantasy because, like I mentioned, after week 1, it seemed like there was no way you could start these guys. And now, at a minimum, Drake London is wide receiver 2, wide receiver 3 territory.
And I got a lot of stock in Drake London. I have him in one of our main dynasty leagues. I have him in our main fantasy league that we do run. And for him to, these back-to-back weeks, show me some, I needed that. And you guys know I'm not a fan of Desmond Ridder, but if he's going to continue to supply Drake London the way that he showed us that he could do at the end of last season, that's the reason why we still respected the floor of a Drake London, because we saw the two late last season. So for him to finally get in that groove and start to get comfortable and show you something fantasy-wise, it's exciting to see because you understand the ceiling that is Drake London.
You have Keenan Allen doing Keenan Allen things, 7 for 85 and a touchdown. Stephon Diggs, 10 for 100 on the dot, 16 targets. A.J. Brown, historic, 4 straight games of 125-plus yards. He goes 7 for 131 against the Jets. It could have been even more because there was one play where A.J. Brown was open for a touchdown if he kept running. He let up, and because of it, it was just outside of the fingertips. If not, he would have had an extra 60 yards and a touchdown, and we're sitting here talking about a 200-yard day. But thankfully for the Jets, it didn't happen, and they were able to win. Michael Pittman was phenomenal. He's been a bit inconsistent throughout the year, but wide receiver 16, a top 20 wide receiver for where he was going in drafts. That's a pretty good bargain. CeeDee Lamb had a big breakout game, 7 for 117, holding all 7 of his targets. Wasn't able to find the end zone, but he had one play that just got down at the 5. The time is going to come, and this is finally the CeeDee Lamb moment that everyone was waiting for, that you drafted him for. And the other name I want to mention is Jalen Waddle, who has back-to-back games with the touchdown. The numbers aren't fantastic, 7 for 51 this year. This week. But get into that end zone, 10 targets last week, 9 targets this week. It doesn't feel like he's going to have that explosive game. I know it's always at any second Waddle can just take one to the crib, but we really have not seen any explosive plays out of Jalen Waddle this season. It's been exclusively Tyreek Hill and the running backs. I'm not sure if it was because of the injury he was dealing with coming into the season, but it hasn't been the same explosive Waddle. Are you noticing that too, or is that just kind of a product of Tyreek Hill being phenomenal?
I think it's just so many mouths to feed on that offense. You have to stay consistent with the run game because you know that it's been as dominant as it has been. You know Tyreek Hill is on a historic pace, a 1-of-1 start to a season so far. So it's just kind of going with what's been working. Now, I will say these last 2 weeks, I've felt and noticed that Tua has been trying to force the ball to Waddle almost. In that Giants game, he was staring down Waddle. The throw before the interception, he forced the ball to him, and the throw on the interception where the Giants had the longest play of the season, he forced that ball into Waddle. Now, similarly, against the Panthers, there's a play where Tua's rolling out to his left. He has Tyreek wide open for a touchdown, but instead forces a ball into Waddle where Waddle's able to score a touchdown. Now, to me, it seems as if he's trying to get Waddle going because he's not the only one we're not the only ones that are realizing that Waddle's kind of lagging behind. And we know the talent that is Jalen Waddle. So it's kind of unorthodox to see him kind of lagging behind the rest of these guys in this offense. So I think that with time, it will come. I think that, the injury is maybe hindering him a little bit, but we're slowly but surely starting to see him get more and more involved into this offense. And if I am a manager of Jalen Waddle, I'm excited.
And it is a scary thought to see what Miami's offense is doing. And you're saying, oh, their second best player has really not done much this season.
Yep.
So not great. But moving on, wide receiver duds. There was a bunch of big name receivers who did not have good games. So I'm going to go through them. You let me know if you're worried or not. Okay. So the first two I think are pretty easy. Puka, 4 for 26, had a touchdown. He dropped in the end zone right in his hands. Should have caught that ball.
Yep.
He would have ended up having 5 for 50 or 60 and a touchdown. Not the Puka we've seen, but more than good enough. And Devontae Adams, 5 targets, 2 receptions for 29 yards. Jimmy G got hurt. It sounds like they avoided a major injury with his back, but I don't know if he's going to be ready to go. So if Jimmy G is not out there, and Tay's also dealing with the shoulder injury still, he doesn't look like he's 100% either. You're probably not worried about Tay long-term for the rest of the season, but at least for a week or two, I'm worried if I have to rely on Aiden O'Connell or Brian
Brian
Hoyer,
Hoyer.
pair that with Devontae Adams' injury.
And also, Jacoby Myers has
It's a
been
dog. He's a dog.
heavily targeted in this offense, and justifiably so. He's been so damn good and so much fun to watch. And I say this as a Broncos fan. I have to acknowledge game when I see it. He's been awesome, bro.
He's been fantastic. Jahan Dotson with the goose egg, you could drop him.
I hate that you had to mention that,
I
man.
had to because I think was it last episode or maybe 2 episodes ago we were saying is Dotson droppable, and we're like, give it one more week. I think it was a show we did with Adam, so 2 weeks ago. But yeah, a goose egg, it's over, unfortunately.
And he had a dot thrown to him that just hit off his hands and he dropped it. That was the only target that he got, and he did not bring it in. That hurt badly. Unfortunately, you gotta let him go, Drew.
Yeah. Moving on though, DJ Moore didn't kill you, 7.5 points, but I put him on this list just because without Justin Fields, I don't want to say unstartable because DJ Moore is super talented and his yards after catch this year are right up there with everyone in the league. But my Lord, backup quarterback play for Chicago is not good on Sunday, and I don't think it's going to get better going forward. So we don't really have a timeline on Justin Fields' injury. He could be out a week. He could be out a month.
Yeah,
I don't think we really know right now.
Dislocated thumb on your throwing hand is horrible.
Yeah, it is tough. But moving on to a couple of other guys. This player, I think we have a chance for a buy window that I would be looking to acquire, and it's Mike Evans. 10 targets, so still elite target share, but only 4 receptions for 49 yards. There's probably people still worrying about the hamstring, but I'm looking at it as he's coming off the bye. He didn't miss any time. He played 80% of snaps, which is what he was playing when he was 100% to start the season. And we saw to start the season, he still had it. He still looked like Mike Evans. He was at least on pace those first 3 weeks to put up like record-breaking numbers for Mike Evans season.
Oh, yeah.
And you always have that chance that he gets traded to a better situation. So coming off this game where 4 for 49 looks ugly, but then you see 10 targets and you see he played 80% of snaps with no setbacks, go out and try to get Mike Evans, because if an owner is a little bit worried, or maybe he's sitting at 2-4 or 1-5, he could be acquirable. Calvin Ridley, 8 targets, 4 receptions for 30 yards. He's been so up and down this year. He's got 2 finishes in the top 10, 1 finish as wide receiver 26, and then 3 finishes as wide receiver 58, 66, and 76. He had a great game against the Colts in London, over 120 yards. We thought that's where we'd get it going, but then he has this dud coming home back in the United States. Are you worried about, is this what Calvin Ridley is? Is he just going to be up and down, inconsistent, or at some point will this offense start to click week in and week out?
It's tough because just starting with Trevor, he has been where this would have been his first time finishing as a quarterback 10 this year if he didn't have Dak Prescott and Justin Herbert play this Monday night game. But he's just been underwhelming, hasn't had a fantasy output of over 20 points. So it starts with Justin Herbert at the quarterback. Right now, the most impressive player on this offense by far has been Travis Etienne. In terms of fantasy, of course. But Christian Kirk at the wide receiver position has been the most consistent option for the Jacksonville Jaguars. And that makes me feel good because that's what I believed coming into the season. You understood the explosiveness that was Calvin Ridley, but the continuity of Christian Kirk last year into this year and the output that he showed last year, it was just undeniable that he was going to get his. But Calvin, it's one of those where you don't know what you're going to get. And so with that, I do feel as if until I see it on a consistent basis, I can't trust that he can be, in some people's cases, my wide receiver 1. That can't be the case as of right now.
I don't disagree. And I see DJ in the comments. He's saying, I don't know what to do with T. Higgins in Dynasty right now. This was another player who busted 2 receptions for 20 yards, only played 54% of snaps. He was coming off that rib injury, but like Mike Evans, I do think there's probably a buy opportunity here with the Bengals going on bye. So maybe there's a team out there that needs to win this week, and T. Higgins has done nothing for you outside of 1 week. You have another week for Joe Burrow to get healthy, and T. Higgins was at least on the field playing 54% of snaps. So we know this rib injury. Is he 100% over it? No, but with the bye, I'm assuming maybe he's 80% next week. And if you could get T. Higgins down the stretch at 100%, he's been terrible this year. Outside of 1 week, he has been unstartable, one of the worst picks in fantasy football. But if he's 100% healthy, and Joe Burrow down the stretch is going to be healthy too. He's someone you could probably acquire very cheap right now. Are you worried about T. Higgins, Smitty, DeAndre Hopkins? Those are the other 3 names I have on this list.
DeAndre Hopkins, I would say I'm the most worried of the 3 for the sole fact that offense in terms of passing is not good. And you can only trust DeAndre Hopkins in a plus matchup where he has shown us that this season, talking about that Colts game where he was absolutely baller, went for over 100. But you can't trust that pass offense on a consistent basis. Even still, where I know Derrick Henry's capable of breaking out huge runs, which he showed us against Baltimore. It's one of those where I want to put my faith in Derrick, but this season you simply can't trust consistency with the Tennessee Titans offense at all. So of the 3, I'm definitely most worried about
You have
D-Hop.
Tannehill with the injury now, high ankle sprain, so it's
Malik
going to be
had
Malik or Levis maybe.
Yeah, Malik had to come in and take over in this game, but Smitty is one we have to speak about because back-to-back weeks, not scoring in the double digits, was targeted a ton of times this game, 11 targets, only brought in 5 catch, and really was struggling to bring in his catches. That's not the Smitty that we know. He has been reliable for a majority of his career so far. So for him to struggle the way that he did against the Jets was surprising to me. Back-to-back weeks of not being who we know Smitty to be. A.J. Brown solidifies himself as the number 1 going forward. But I'm worried. I got to say that I am. Great matchups back-to-back with Miami and Washington to bounce back. But it's something that I'm definitely keeping in the back of my mind where Smitty has struggled, and it hasn't been in a way where you think that he can recover from, where drops are not something that you feel great about. And where a matchup where the Jets were without Sauce and DJ Reed, you fully expected him to take advantage, and he didn't. But you know what? I'm gonna lead with optimism because these next 2 weeks are definitely one that I'm intrigued with the matchups of Miami, of course, and Washington.
Yeah, and you got to think not just Smitty, but that whole offense, the offensive line, Jalen Hurts, everyone after this loss they just had to the Jets, Miami, Sunday Night Football, you expect them to come back in a big
It's a
way.
get-right game, definitely.
It is a get-right game. Moving on to tight ends here, we only have really a handful. Kelsey was phenomenal, who surprised 21 fantasy points. Dalton Schultz, 16 fantasy points. Kyle Pitts, back-to-back games, getting into the end zone here, 4 for 43 and a touchdown. Jonnu Smith also involved. He got the tight end 3 and 4 on the week. Basically identical stat lines. The only name I do want to mention here, I'm going to mention the waiver wire, is Michael Mayer, rookie tight end from the Raiders, who to start off the year, the first month, was not involved at all. He's not on the field. He's not playing snaps. These last 2 weeks ago, he got involved a little bit, around 3 targets, I want to say. But this was really his breakout game. 6 targets, 5 receptions for 75 yards. In a tight end landscape that is ugly, that is gross, a rookie tight end that has a bit of juice. He's not Sam Laporta by any means, but a little bit of juice could be useful down the road. Is there anyone else? Does Michael Mayer interest you at all? How much fab would you drop on Michael Mayer?
In tight end leagues, it's super tough because you know that it's a crapshoot. If you're lucky enough to have Dalton Schultz on your squads, I'm just letting it be known he's only rostered in 55% of leagues. So if he's available in your league, go out and get him. But it's one of those where Michael Mayer, without Jimmy Garoppolo, when Jimmy was really the one letting it fly to Michael, that was great. But I don't know if I can trust it in terms of fab. Maybe $5, just understanding how thin the tight end landscape is. I don't want to get too crazy with it. But Dalton Schultz, if he's available, go out and get him because CJ Stroud and him are finally getting comfortable together. And he's gone to the end zone multiple times in multiple weekends.
To quickly go over the tight end duds, I think the only real disappointing one was Laporta, who got 11 targets, only 4 receptions for 36 yards. He was dealing with a calf injury going into this game, and honestly, the Lions dominated this game. It was only 20-6, but it felt like they were up 30 the entire game. So 11 targets, you'd love to see. The production wasn't there, but if a terrible game is him still getting that many looks, you'll be okay with that.
Definitely.
Higbee wasn't good. Logan Thomas was my start of the week, was terrible. The only other name worth mentioning is probably George Kittle, who even with CMC and Debo going out, did nothing, played 98% of snaps and had 1 reception for 1 yard. Just goes to show you the type of game that the 49ers were having. And really just George Kittle in general, this is who he is, right? Last week, he goes up, has multiple touchdowns, tight end 1. He looks insane. And then this next week, I'm sure plenty of people started him, and he gives you an absolute nothing, 1 point in PPR league. So not great from Kittle, but it's who we should expect. So let's go through this waiver wire here, and then maybe at the end we'll do 5 minutes or so of questions. So we have three big I think four actually, because there's one name I think is being slept on. Four big running backs who are going to get an uptick in work because of injuries. You got the 49ers situation. And listen, outside of Kyron, who we know is going to be out, Craig Reynolds with David Montgomery said was going to miss a little bit of time, whatever that means. And CMC, we don't really know. So assuming these guys are going to be out, you need to prioritize these pickups. Jordan Mason and Elijah Mitchell. Now, Mason got most of the work. He was more efficient. But we have seen Elijah Mitchell just a season ago, 2 seasons ago, before they got CMC. He was the workhorse. He was the RB1 in this offense, and he was extremely useful, extremely great for fantasy and for real life. So are you still leaning Mason from what you saw this past game against Cleveland, or does Mitchell interest you at all?
And it's also what he showed me against Dallas. 10 opportunities, 69 rushing yards, and a touchdown. He's looked very solid behind this Niners offense. And really, it does not matter who's going to fulfill this role. I think that they will do an exceptional job. That's just the history that Shanahan has shown us, like I said. But I do lean Jordan Mason. I think that he's a little bit more explosive. I think he has a little bit of, let me not say continuity, because, of course, Elijah was with the team last year. But just off this season alone, we've seen limited opportunity, but he's looked good in that opportunity. So I do lean Mason. But it's one of those that Elijah Mitchell might be worth a pickup, where people are so heavily fixated on Jordan that you can go and you can get Elijah Mitchell for cheap because so many people are just looking and staring down Mason.
Yeah, that's what we saw this past week with Arizona, where it was DeMarcio, right?
DeMarcado.
He was the one getting all the love, and Keontae Ingram was the one who ended up getting the most work.
Yep.
So Craig Reynolds, running back for the Lions, they play Baltimore this upcoming week. Zach Evans, rookie running back for the Rams, plays Pittsburgh this week. And then you have Jordan Mason / Elijah Mitchell going up against Minnesota this week. So I don't love the matchups for Craig Reynolds or for Zach Evans going up against Baltimore and Pittsburgh. Baltimore has actually been kind of beatable on the ground.
Sure,
Pittsburgh's been decent. Minnesota is beatable too. How would you rank these guys? I don't love any of them because none of them feel like long-term solutions. But I guess if you had to start one for this upcoming week, how would you rank them?
I guess for the upcoming week, you lean Craig, just because history has shown us that when Detroit is relying on a running back, they're going to give them continuous work. And we saw that with Craig, where he saw 61% of snaps when Demon went down, did only see 10 opportunities, was not efficient with that. But Tampa Bay's rush defense has been solid. Demont was definitely one of those plays that I didn't even love coming in, regardless of the opportunity. But going up against Baltimore, understanding how great this offense has been, I think they'll rely on Craig a little bit more than the rest of these guys. Zach Evans may be worth a look for the opportunity, for the fact of, I should say, that it's going to be a 1 week type of play, and you can get him for cheap, especially with a guy like me who both my running backs, I have Derrick Henry and Brees. Both of them are on bye. My options are limited. I have Jalen Warren. I was able to get Keontae Ingram. Maybe a guy like Zach Evans is on my radar because I know that it's a 1 week play. After that, I don't have to worry about it, and I can get Zach for cheap. So that's one of those that I probably put second. But another name you didn't mention, I'm interested, is Kareem Hunt on your radar. Did get into the end. I knew it. And I only say that because when Ford, of course, stepped into that opportunity to take lead ownership of the backfield, you and I had conversations. How do we feel about Kareem Hunt? I know that there was some mix of opinions, not just from us, of course, but just our league mates as a whole. Is it Kareem Hunt's time? Is it finally Kareem Hunt's time to shine?
So he was more efficient, right? Like he was the one who finished higher for fantasy, RB10 on the week. Jerome Ford still outsnapped him, still had more opportunities. It's been tough because right when the injury happened, I went out and put up $70-something in our league. And I was like, he's got Tennessee, then Baltimore, then a bye, then San Francisco. I basically made that pickup saying that these next 3 to 4 weeks are probably going to suck. But after that, I'm hoping, and on top of this, Deshaun Watson gets hurt, so the entire offense kind of goes to shit. So I was thinking after that, things will lighten up. You got Indy, Seattle, Arizona, Baltimore again. I still think Kareem Hunt's the change of pace back. He's still the RB2 in this backfield. But I am interested to see what Jerome Ford looks like against the non-elite front seven
For
with
sure.
hopefully Deshaun Watson back next week, because he's been getting the work, like carries wise, touches wise. He's been getting around that 15 touch mark, which you're happy with your RB2. So Kareem Hunt is going to be someone who's going to be at the top of your waiver wire. You're going to recognize the name, but I would probably prioritize other players over him.
Yeah, and 17 for 84, almost 5 a carry. Jerome was definitely
Oh,
great in his own right. Yeah,
yes, for sure.
Just didn't have the touchdown to cap off a great day.
Yeah, Hunt had the better fantasy day. Ford, as you said, probably the more
Yeah.
efficient real life day. So the only other name, this is a name we mentioned on Thursday Night Football to not forget, and I want to bring it up again, is Rashee Rice. Ends up playing only 49% of snaps. I don't think we had that number when we recorded the show on Thursday, but put up 72 yards, his best game as a rookie, or his career, I should say. This is a situation where if you have a roster spot open, I would spend it on Rashee Rice, right? If you have that spot to burn, if you have someone that you can move to IR and open up a spot, I would be very interested to pick him up, because I think this is the week you could be a week early and maybe you could drop $7 to $10 a fab. If he goes off next week for 80 yards and a touchdown, now you're going to have to spend probably 20% of your fab budget to be able to go out there and get them. Back-to-back great games, rookie receiver with Patrick Mahomes. So he's probably unless I need a running back, he's probably my number one ad this week. Going through the other names that I have here, there's really not a ton that stick out to me. Like Wan'Dale Robinson has been getting looks, but that offense is so ugly. Zay Jones can't seem to stay healthy. Tutu Atwell is someone who has kind of been phased out of this offense. He's gotten 5 targets and 1 target since Cooper Kupp has returned. Shaheed is a fun ad, but someone that's just very inconsistent right now. Is there any names I'm missing that you want to bring up?
Mr. Curtis Samuel, 3 weeks in a row, double-digit fantasy points, 2 weeks in a row of getting into the end zone. Who I thought Jahan Dotson would be, seemingly enough, it's been Curtis Samuel. Of course, on a lesser scale, I thought Jahan would be way better because we know the potential that is Jahan, and I'm not losing faith. I still believe in him. But reality is reality. Finished as wide receiver 11, wide receiver 15, wide receiver 24 in the span of 3 weeks. Has the Giants, has Philadelphia, New England, Seattle, the Giants again. Dallas, not a great matchup, but Miami, definitely someone that you should look at and to add to your roster, someone that you could probably get for cheap as well.
Absolutely. So this is going to wrap up this episode of the Fantasy Reaction. If you have any questions, I see you guys in the comments. We're going to wrap things up here, but leave them in the comments. We answer all the questions, man. You could go back and look. We're not lying. All of those questions were in there, answering start sits, waivers, trades, whatever it is, dynasty, redraft. Let us know your questions, but we appreciate your time. We'll see you next time.
Peace.